Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of Anime Brain Freeze. We are your Adrift hosts.
I am John.
And I'm CC. And when there's too much cool anime to watch, we've got you covered. Today we will take you on a summer trip to many different worlds. First, I will join the students from Sonny Boy, who have been imbued with strange powers and cast away into a realm of weird realities and rule sets. And after that, John and I will travel to steampunk Paris and solve some mysteries with a human, a couple of vampires, and other enthralling creatures of the night and day in the Case Study of Vanitas. A lot of extravagant sightseeing on the itinerary, so grab your luggage, but don't pause the pod. We'll be right back. They try to hit you. They try to kick you down and out. 36 students find themselves and their school building suddenly adrift in a void-like dimension. When supernatural powers awaken in some of them, a sense of detachment begins to divide the group. Despite the student council's attempts to impose order, they clash with the students possessing special abilities who rebel against their strict control. This conflict leads them to discover that this world has its own set of rules, and following them is necessary for survival. After one of the students decides to take a leap of faith, the school switches dimensions once again. While they deal with the unique challenges and circumstances that each world presents, the students must unravel the mysterious phenomenon and find a way back home. Alright, Sonny Boy is a 12-episode series, an anime original and produced by Studio Madhouse. Well known, we don't really have to run down their track record at this point, I think.
They've kind of been around the block.
Yes, we have mentioned them often enough in this show. Also mentioned before as the writer and the director of the show, Shingo Natsume, who is one of the very first creator names uttered on our little show. In our very first episode, to be exact, because he also directed the first season of One Punch Man, which was our very first review on this show. It's been a while.
What is time?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
That is a good question, especially relating to this special series I'm reviewing. He also directed AK-13, which we reviewed too, as well as Space Dandy and Boogie Pop and others. But I think Sonny Boy is the first show where he also wrote the entire script and came up with the story, apparently, which is really interesting. And I wonder if he will do more of that in the future, because so far he's mostly been a key animator and a director and episode director, I think. So this is a new territory for him, unless he has done something outside of the anime space that I'm not aware of, because I only looked up the anime credits for him. So yeah, that's interesting. The look of this show might be a bit divisive for some people. The animation is a bit wonky at times. Like sometimes it's very fluid, sometimes it's kind of choppy. Sometimes it feels a bit rotoscoped. Sometimes it's like, okay, why is the frame rate so low? It's especially when some characters are in the distance. But it's not CG, so it's kind of weird seeing that in 2D. The color palette is very limited in the beginning and later opens up immensely with a lot of high contrast color work. The show uses a crazy hodgepodge of art styles, the somewhat realistic but kind of flat anime style for its characters and basic environments, weird cartoony glossy designs for some of its objects and tools, and then you get surrealist, impressionist, expressionist-esque vistas, or something that just looks like a simple crayon drawing, or, I don't know, 8-bit computer graphics for some of its freaky worlds that the characters travel to. I liked it, but it definitely took some time getting used to, especially some of the characters' faces look really loose and off-model at times. The original character design was done by Hisashi Iguchi, who did the same for Rujin Z and Perfect Blue, and was adapted by Norifumi Kugai, who also did the adapted character designs of AK-13 and Boogie Pop, and their style is definitely recognizable. It's definitely leaning more toward, at the same time, more realistic character designs, not as exaggerated as other anime styles, but from a different point of view, it's also more like this loose, weirdly surreal kind of character design that feels like it's a bit otherworldly at times, also because it's so flat. So it's weird, but again, I liked it and I grew really fond of it, especially when it came to facial expressions of the characters and conveying emotions, which is where that character design shines, and that's the most important aspect of the show, really, and we get to that once we get to the story momentarily. But a true high point of this show is the soundtrack by Konish, who also did the music for Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal and Recovery of an MMO Junkie, and I think you have favorably mentioned them before on the show, John.
Yeah, his work is incredible, and I'm pretty sure he's got plenty of work to his name, most of which I haven't watched or played or seen, but I would love to be able to hear his music more often. Man.
Yeah, good stuff. Sonny Boy uses music very sparsely, especially in the first couple of episodes, but also very effectively. For example, in the entire first episode, there's no music whatsoever until the very end, when one of the characters, like mentioned in the summary, Nozomi, takes a leap of faith, jumps off basically the school, and everyone gets warped to a different dimension for some reason again. And the black void suddenly turns into a blue sky and a blue sea, and we're close to a lush island. And only at that moment does the first music of the show hit. The ending theme, in fact, Boy Meets Girl by the Gingnam Boys. It's a great moment, and like I said, used very effectively. And yeah, we see that more as the show progresses. The series has also no OP, just DED, and no animation in DED, just the staff scroll. And like I said, again, at least in the first couple of episodes, like halfway through, there's barely any music in it. There's just some very key moments when we have some important character moment or resolution, and then the music hits, or some important montage or stuff like that. And yeah, then we get music, but aside from that, it's mostly just silence or environmental noise. So when there's suddenly a track playing, of course, it's very memorable and recognizable, and it's like, oh, okay, this is a needle drop in a way, I guess. And yeah, there are some real emotional bangers in there. I guess bangers is the wrong word, because it's not like they're smashing or anything. But you know what I mean. It's like they really do a good job at underlining the mood of the key scenes in later episodes in the show, which I guess the soundtrack is there for as well. And also complementing the character emotions and everything. So
interesting. I guess our boy Shinichiro Watanabe served as the musical advisor for the show?
Yes, I also read that as well in the credits. And yeah, that's really interesting, because especially in the later parts of the show, that definitely feels like a thing that also Watanabe could have done, just in terms of what kind of tracks are being played and the lyrics in some of those insert songs and stuff like that, and the emotions that are being conveyed and the mood and kind of this semi-nostalgic, but also a bit of a melancholic undertone in there, which again reflects pretty much what this show, I think, is about. And that's where we get to the crux of the thing, and I think which is the reason why John dropped out of this after 1 or 2 episodes.
I think I watched 3 or 4 episodes.
Oh, okay, all right, interesting. So the setup for this show is also already pretty damn weird. So we got this body of students from high school, and we start the show basically in media res without any preamble or anything. And it's just like they're already in this black void with their school. They have no idea what the fuck is going on, how they got there. So, you know, they're basically in the same place that we are, wondering what the hell is going on. Some of them have manifested weird powers. There's a character that has basically like Asakase Kaze, who has like basically your standard Esper powers, where he can fly, he can manipulate his environments in a telekinetic way, I guess, kind of open portals too. I think that he's able to do that. Some have more low-key powers, just like being able to shine light from their finger or stuff like that. There's a character, a very important one, called Rashdani, I think an Indian exchange student, or I think that's what he is, or half Indian, half Japanese. And he has basically the ability to create apps for anything, but that also encompasses like physical manifestation of certain virtual concepts. Like basically he can create items from thin air. That can be anything from tools or, I don't know, houses, spaceships, whatever, I guess, to a certain extent anyway, computers, computer programs, weird robotic animals. And they all have like this very specific look, which is this very plain, cartoony, again, crayon painting-ish look. Very colorful. And yeah, he can do that. And there's another character, very important in the second episode, Mizuho. And for the rest of the show, she's one of the main characters, who can basically order anything she wants from a service called Nyamazon. So she can basically order all the stuff she wants from that service, and her 3 cats, bring it to her that she apparently brought with her on the trip. And yeah, these are just some of the powers that are at display here, and some weirder ones later on. But one of our main characters, or 2 of our main characters in the beginning, don't seem to have any specific power set, and it's the boy Nagara and the girl Nozomi. And Nagara is kind of like this, feels, let's say, the theme of the show, adrift youth, who feels like he doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life. Like we see him in the beginning in the school still, or a flashback to the school where he's like this interview with his counselor, I guess, who asks him what he wants to do with his life and everything. And he doesn't really know what to do. And apparently there's trouble with his mom and everything. The show doesn't really go into that much. There's a scene very late in the show where you see him walking out of his apartment, a flashback to when they were still in the real world, where his entire apartment, or that of him and his mom, is littered with garbage. Like there's just garbage bags everywhere. So it feels like maybe that's the problem. Or he lives alone and only made up his mom. I don't fucking know. But it's unless I missed something, the show doesn't really go into that. But yeah, for several reasons, he doesn't really seem to have much incentive to do anything. He just lets himself like float in the ocean of life, really, and lets things be. And there's an important scene where just a bird dying in front of the school, and he just looks at it and doesn't do anything, goes past, which one of his co-students berates him for. But he's very much I don't know. I don't know what to do guy. That kind of person who just drifts and is kind of lost. And the opposite of that seems to be Nozomi, who is kind of like this girl who is very much, if someone tells her what to do, she immediately kind of goes against it, or is like, no, I have my own head. I know what to do. When in the very first episode, the student council is trying to impose some rule on the students, and he's like, hey, here's your smartphone, please join this whatever WhatsApp group, this text chat group, so everyone can get their fucking their chores and shit, and do certain things, so that we can get some order in this place, because we need some order. And she's like, no thank you, and throws the phone on the floor. And yeah, she doesn't want to have anything to do with that. And I think there's a flashback to the school, to her school days, where some of her counselors just wrote a report on her in her school book or something, and just like, hey, here's what you need to do, and here's where you need to go in your life, and she just tears that shit up. It's like, nope, I make up my own thoughts. Thank you very much. And so she's kind of like this, fuck the rules, I do what I want, and I have my own head girl. And so this kind of clashes with what Nagara is about, really. So it's really interesting. But those two become friends against the odds. They are the first to like connect, and it doesn't seem like Nagara also has a lot of friends or anything. He isn't treated unfriendly by the other students, at least not initially, but it doesn't feel like he belongs really to the group or anything. And Nozomi is like the first person he really seems to attach to, and vice versa. And yeah, she was an exchange student apparently, so or she was abroad or stuff like that, and just recently returned. So yeah, that's how that happens. And like I said, again, Mitsuho later on becomes also very important to the story, and these are our three main characters. And then there are a bunch of other students who come into play into one way or another. And that's the basic setup. Where the show goes from there is not really what I would have expected. And I think that is the case for you as well, John, right? Because that, what was the reason that you dropped off after the episodes you watched?
I mean, I don't know if it wasn't what I expected, but I just had kind of trouble trying to parse together what they were trying to do. And granted, maybe for this story, the 3-episode test was not enough, but I kind of got to a point where I was like, I don't know what the fuck is going on,
Mhm.
and I kind of just walked away from it. But I respect Shingo Natsume, and I respect the Herculean effort put into this show. So don't mistake me as walking away from this show as dismissing it. It was just me being like, I don't think I get it.
That's fine. That's totally fine. And I mean, you sometimes you just need a semblance of I get it to get attached to the show, right?
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I thought I got it. I was like, we get immediately we get like this thing where the student, like I said, like where the student council, especially this guy Hoshi, who has like this creepy yard-long stare and this everlasting creepy smile on his fucking face, who's kind of manipulating things around. And he does this again in the second episode when he riles up everyone against Mizuho because they think she's burning stuff, but it's another. Then they found out that's another rule set of the world, because this world has a bunch of weird rule sets. Like there's you can't go against the rule, or you're punished with like these arbitrary weird punishments where you have to divide for like hours to end, or you have to run around the school several laps. You get like this weird black X on your face.
Yeah, it seemed like it was randomized, kind of. It was weird.
Yeah, in the beginning they make it look like one of the students is able to do that is his power, but it's not. It's just a rule set of this world. That's like the twist. And it's the punishment seems randomized. It's like, no, here's some agonizing task in a way that you have to do for damaging the school, or I don't know, going against another certain set of rules. But that specific thing only happens in the first episode. Then in the extra episode, there are other rules we get introduced to, and that's where Mizuho's thing comes into play, because all the things she ordered, of course, everyone goes to her and it's like, hey, give me shit. You can order this, you don't have to pay anything for it apparently, so we need supplies, so give them to us. And so she basically gets these giant ass grocery lists and just gives them the stuff she gets to the other students, even if she wants to or not, just so they leave her alone. And then things start burning up. And then we find out that, first it's like the student council is saying, hey, who's doing this? We get the stuff from her, she might be responsible. And then Nagara doesn't really do a good job of communicating what he thinks, and also that forces some views for some students where it's like, hey, I saw Mizuho standing in front of a burning tree, so she might know something. And then another student picks that up and it's like, hey, Nagara is saying that Mizuho burned a tree in the woods, so she might be responsible for this. And Nagara doesn't really make a big effort to say like, no, stop, that's not what I said. Stop it. Stop with this bullshit. This is becoming a fucking wildfire. This is becoming a witch hunt. And this is kind of his character in the beginning. He's very much like, I don't want to cause any trouble, but I also don't want to speak up. I just leave me alone and stuff like that. And this is part of his character journey, getting away from that in this show and finding the strength to do that, which is very important. So in the beginning, it's like, hey, the student council is kind of trying to bring order to things, or their own order, and trying to manipulate stuff. So I felt like, hey, this show is going to be about following or rebelling against arbitrary rules, and the students clashing with each other over it due to their different personalities and psychological baggage. And then it's going to be, I don't know, there are going to be two factions and it's going to be an all-out war or something, Lord of the Flies kind of thing, right? That's what I expected. And there's part of that in there. There are some characters that clash with each other because of their different viewpoints, because, Nozomi is very much, like I said, no, why are we doing this? This is just made up bullshit. And we need to get home. And which later turns out she can see a light in the distance. And she says, hey, if we search long enough for different worlds, we might find the one where we can go home to. There's a bunch of stuff like that in there, where a bunch of students have an opinion on a certain thing or live their life a certain way, and then clash with students who live their life a different way. And then some of them grow through that experience, some don't. So I wasn't completely wrong. But aside from that, and this is where I totally agree with your opinion, John, the show doesn't really seem to be interested in giving you answers. Like, by the end, up to the end, there are a bunch of things in there where I'm pretty sure I think I know what the show is about, but I'm not sure. And it's just interspliced with a lot of different weird things from all the worlds that they travel to, and just weird little stories and, character stories, little flashbacks to the character's school life and everything. And I get a feeling that I know what the show is trying to do, but it never makes these big exclamation points, or has these big, really big moments for each important character, where it's like, this is what all of this led up to. There's some in there for some of the characters, but they're more quiet and subdued. Underlined by a great soundtrack for sure, and thus emphasized. But again, if you know anime, usually when there's a big moment, it's big. So the show doesn't really have that much. So it's really interesting in that regard. It has a really interesting style, both in storytelling and visually, of course. And it's really, really hard to parse where it's trying to go and what's actually trying to say, because it switches that up, excluding kind of one of its main themes, I guess, and I'll get to that. It goes a bunch of different ways, and it goes into very abstract storytelling and a very abstract visual stuff. And it reminds me in some parts of Ikuhara stuff. I reviewed Sarazanmai, and, had some mixed feelings about that show, but ultimately I think I liked it. And some of that style, or in terms of abstract visual storytelling and symbolism and visual metaphors and everything, you can also find in Sonny Boy, but in a very different tone. And I don't know, it feels much more melancholic, it feels much more subdued, it feels not as loud and not as overt and not as theatrical as Ikuhara's stuff, which his stuff always feels more like a stage play than anything else. And this kind of feels like nostalgic, melancholic student movie, I guess, at points. Which is funny, because at some point, when it gets really weird, if you think the beginning of the show is weird, hold onto your fucking butts, because this show gets fucking weird. Later on, one of the later key episodes, they stumble upon a world. These worlds are also always really different every time they visit them. There's just very strange new worlds with very strange new rule set. Like I said, sometimes they can stumble into a world that is completely 2D, 2D flat plane on the ground that is basically a Pac-Man clone, and they have to find an item there that might help them to find a door to their world. Or we get worlds that downright reject humans because the laws of physics don't apply to them, and you can't enter them as a human because it would drive you fucking insane, or you just get immediately expelled again to your original world. So it's super weird and visually really interesting. I imagine watching this show high is an experience. Might also send you on a bad trip, but just in terms of visuals, especially the final episode, has some fucking wild looking shit in it, and I enjoyed it a lot. I thought, from a visual perspective, and when the show fires on all cylinders, animation production wise, this is a sight to behold. It's an amazing looking show, and it's stuff I have not seen before in certain aspects. So, really cool stuff. Some things reminiscent of some of Satoshi Kon's stuff. Not as polished, definitely not, because of course he did mostly movies, but also it doesn't look as polished as some parts of Paranoia Agents. But yeah, just in terms of surreal visuals, it reminded me of that in parts. And yeah, in a later episode, they come across a world that is basically a movie theater. And, Rajdani, our tech guy, learns how to splice different worlds together by using film reels of each specific world, and it gets super weird, and Kenjiro Tsuda appears as a giant black dog who has been adrift for 5,000 years apparently, and is actually a student of their school, but from the time of their graduation, so from the future. Shit gets fucking wild. Ridiculous. Yeah, exactly. That was my response. What the fuck is going on? It was fun. It was fun seeing so much weird shit getting thrown at me. And some of it, weirdly enough, makes sense, at least on a thematic level, and what they are trying to do with each respective character. Even Kenjiro Tsuda as a black dog, I guess. But, when it first initially hit you, you already had so many questions that have not been answered. And then this shit happens, and you're like, what? And now you have even more questions. So that was definitely something to deal with. And that doesn't really stop by the time the show ends. And then my question is, can you deal with that kind of storytelling? I think John couldn't. I think you were like, no, this is too much for me. This is too abstract. This is too weird, and I don't get it. And I am partially with him because I get some parts of this show. I get where the show is, I think, I'm not sure, that's the thing. What the show is trying to do with its characters, where the show is trying to go, what its main themes are, what it's trying to say, but it's never really that clear on it. It's never really spelling it all out. It's spelling some things out, but not all of them. And if you are a lore guy, if you are a world building guy, if you are hey, I want my answers laid out in front of me. I want a clear, straightforward plot, linear, chronological. This show might absolutely not be for you because it does a lot of jumping around in terms of time. It does a lot of flashbacks. Sometimes you don't know it's a flashback, and then it later becomes clear that it was one. And some of the things that you question in the beginning never get answered. You never really understand how the people got their powers, because it later turns out apparently they might have had them before they went adrift. And then there's some characters who might or might not be God. There are some characters who are the emperors of other worlds that might also be from the student council. Later, the students built an ark and travel between worlds, and there's so much weird shit that basically works on dream logic that you just have to accept it and try to find the bits and pieces in there that make sense to you and construct a message from that and something that makes sense to you, that gives you an answer to at least some of your questions. And that's not always easy to do, especially if you're not into analyzing certain visual cues or symbols or metaphors or whatever. And I am into that, I want to say, but I'm also super bad at it. I've never read anything that helps me do that, like any tutorial on how to do film analysis, or to know if a director puts a certain thing in his series or his movie, what does he or she want to say with it? Some of those things are totally obvious, of course. There's just they're very easy to understand. But some of them, and this relates also to this show, sometimes there's so much of it in there that you don't really know anymore what matters and what doesn't. Case in point, I would say Neon Genesis Evangelion, because there's a lot of shit in there in terms of visual cues that doesn't really relate to what that story really is about. And I think that's the same case for Sonny Boy. There's a lot of shit in here that I think overall, in terms of what the story is trying to do and what it's trying to say, doesn't really matter. And trying to separate that from the stuff that actually matters and that is important is sometimes a bit hard, because you can get lost in the minutiae of all the crazy shit thrown at you. And trying to parse what makes sense in that and what doesn't, and what has to make sense and what doesn't have to make sense. So yeah, it's a very daunting series in my opinion. It was entertaining to me. I enjoyed watching it and trying to find out what it was trying to say and what it was trying to do. And I liked the characters, at least some of them. But it's weird. And I still don't know how to feel about the show. By the end I watched it. It's really hard. It's, I think I liked it. I don't know if I'm satisfied. So it's, watching it, it's really weird. So I think, since this is an only review and I'm mostly the guy talking all the time, and I didn't want to drag out those reviews anymore, and a lot of the things I say could be spoilers or couldn't. Again, I'm not sure if they would be important spoilers if I talked about them, so I don't know if I want to mention them. I don't know what examples to tell you that might give you an idea what the story really is about and agree with me or not agree with me. We get some hints in the beginning and throughout the show that this is a story about characters. Again, that is the least subtle thing. All the characters in the show are adrift. They are adrift in a black void and later on an island. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to get home. And I think that kind of relates to most of the characters' actual lives in the show. And the show does that over and over again, where it's like, oh, okay, this is about this character for some reason being stuck in their life in a certain place where they don't really want to be. And they're trying to grow and evolve to get past that. And there is a bunch of that in this show, but also, seasoned with a bunch of weird gobbledygook and a bunch of weird little stories and visual cues. For example, there is Cap, who is like the guy in the beginning we think dishes out these punishments. He's a big hulking baseball guy. But in one of the later episodes, he tells a fable about monkeys playing baseball. Like in the 4th episode, he says like, hey, I here in the forest, monkeys played baseball. So it seems like a made-up nonsense at face value.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, but it quickly becomes clear that the entire story he tells to the other students relate to some of the students and their ambitions or lack thereof and their attitude towards life in general. Again, there's a lot to unpack here, and the series doesn't hold your hand at all to decipher the code, in my opinion. So at times, like you also probably noticed, John, it can feel quite obtuse. And again, the question is, as a watcher, can you deal with that? And can you bear that and make it to the end of the show to maybe get something of value out of it? And I can't tell you if you can do that, because it heavily depends on how you watch series, how you watch movies, what you want to get out of them, and what your main draw to certain shows is.
Like, I mean, I don't mind being led around in weird ways, but you gotta have a plan in mind. You gotta have a goal. And I felt like from the few episodes I watched that I probably wasn't going to get there.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's some parts, some plot points in the beginning and in the middle of the show that get brought up, and you get the feeling that they will lead to a specific certain point and revelation, and then they just get dropped by the wayside. And you wonder, is that intentional? Were they just means to an end? Or is that like an oversight? And I'm still not sure, John. I'm still not sure. That's the problem. It could be intentional, because there's some hints in there where it's like, oh, okay, that character, that part of the plot was only in there for that specific reason, for that specific point in the show, and after that we don't need it anymore, because it only served the purpose of highlighting one specific aspect of one specific character. But it was introduced and built kind of like this thing where it's like, hey, this will lead to something. This is supposed to be our main antagonist, for example. This is supposed to be our hint to what our characters have to do to get home. And then a few episodes later, it's like, no, we're not going to bring that up again, because that's the past thing. We don't need that anymore. And that's gone from the show entirely and never appears again. It was like, what?
I'm constantly reminded, and I know I've brought this up before, but I'm constantly reminded of Kill la Kill. When they were like, oh, we need to use this bullet made of life fibers. And then they talk it up for maybe like an episode, and then they like entirely forgot about it. It's like, what happened? Mm-hmm. What happened to the thing you were talking? What'd you do? What?
Or what was it? Akira Toriyama forgetting about some form of Super Saiyan of Goku or something?
That's right. Oh my
God. I mean, that happens.
And then there's the king of being forgetful, Araki, who just forgets shit about his own comic that he's been writing for 20-something years now. God, we love JoJo's, but it's also a fucking mess.
Sometimes, yeah, a beautiful, beautiful mess. But yeah, that's the problem. That could very well be the case that, Shingo Natsume was like, hey, I've got an idea. I got a concept for what I want to do with this show, and I don't know how to get there. So I'm just going to write some shit, and then after like a couple of episodes, like, that doesn't work. So I'll just drop this, and he tries something else. That might be the case, but also there's some parts in there, like I said, where I feel like, no, this had a specific purpose. It was just a very limited one, and that's why it's only in here for a limited time. So I'm not sure. Again, getting down to it, I think this is an analogy to people, again, like I mentioned before, or like I alluded to before, adrift or stuck in their own lives. tied down and strangled by regrets of choices made or not made and roads taken or not taken. Seeing literal worlds being shattered when bonds break, loved ones die, and their lives change forever. Plagued by indecision and disillusionment about what life is and how they have to go about their life. You know, like a lot of things happen when you exit school and enter your work life and everything. That can happen to you, right? So that very much resonates in this show. It's like, no, there are a lot of episodes that highlight the theme of arbitrary rules and menial tasks and working just for the sake of work's sake, right? Of just doing it because that's how you do it. That's what is done. There's an episode where characters carry blocks of stones down a tower, and it's supposed to be a tower that is built towards heaven so they can reach heaven and then get back to their world. And Narga is like, why are you carrying the stone blocks down? Isn't it a tower? Aren't you supposed to build at the top to reach the heavens? And the character he's talking to is like, I've never thought about it. It's just like everyone did it, so I'm doing it as well. And it's like, okay, I think I get what you're doing here, show. It's like, I get what you're saying. And it's very, very clear that students are saying this, who are very close to graduating high school. And, you know, there are just some things in here that seem to hint at a very clear message and a very clear thing it's trying to say, and something that resonates very much with a lot of experiences from real life for a lot of people. And I can imagine, you know, Shingo Natsume maybe being disillusioned with certain things about his work life. I wouldn't be surprised, especially in the anime industry. So that could be very well a very personal story, or also him having experienced that when he got out of school. I don't know if he had his mind set on being an animator and did immediately that, or if he was like, Jesus Christ, what am I going to fucking do with my life? And the show very much does a lot of that. And that's the most prominent theme, I feel like. I get the feeling that a lot of characters are in a stasis caused by clinging to nostalgia and happy memories. And everyone is unable to escape the ticking clock of their lives running out. And that leads to depression and anger and frustration and denial and everything. So the show is ultimately about that. Some of the characters facing that, some of the characters don't. And some of the characters trying to get out of that rut, or at least ultimately grow, evolve, and get to a place where they can be content with who they are compared to who they imagined themselves to be in the future. And there are definitely some parallels to Saitama from One Punch Man here. And if I remember correctly, there are some story beats in Space Dandy that tackle these subjects and themes as well. So it's fitting that Shingo Natsume would be the director for this, I guess, because it seems like he is gravitating to these kind of stories. And yeah, so this might just be a personal thing and something that he thinks about quite often. That's why this is kind of like the ultimate version of this, like all of his thoughts on that subject matter, on stasis, on being stuck in your life, on being adrift, drifting through your life, being cast away, being, you know, thrown away, being ignored, feeling like you're alone in the world. And this might be his abstract masterpiece on that. I don't know. I'm not sure, because it's a very inaccessible show at points. It's very hard, again, to understand and parse what it's trying to do. I think this is what it's trying to do, what I just mentioned. But again, I'm not sure, because there's so much other weird shit in the show. There's so much weird things that don't necessarily relate to the themes I mentioned before. They kind of do, but then they're kind of their own stories, and they're set up in this very weird fantasy world and fantasy concepts and rejection of physics and everything, that it's sometimes hard to find the through line and, you know, the red thread. And that makes it a bit difficult to enjoy it at times, I guess. Like I said before, I enjoyed it, but I can imagine it for some people who are not into that shit, who don't want to puzzle all the time when watching a show. This, and I don't do either. I really need to be in the mood to watch something like that. And I guess I was for this show. And because there were some things and characters in there that just hooked me and made me sit through the more daunting parts of the story where I just basically didn't understand anything of what was going on. But yeah, I think this show ultimately is more of a tone poem than anything else. Like I said, some things get a bit resolved in the end, but it doesn't really answer many of the questions you probably had when watching the first episode, and many that came after that. If you go into it for the characters and for some of the things the show, I think, is trying to say about people stuck in a specific uncertain place in their lives. You know, if you have been in an emotional spot like one of the characters in the show, you might find something to latch onto and get some resolve and catharsis by the end, which I did. But if you go in for the mystery or the world building or the quote-unquote plot, you might be disappointed because the show drops most of that by the end in favor of bringing some kind of closing to the emotional journey of its three ostensible main characters. Mm-hmm. For one-time watch, that was sufficient for me to come away from the show content, albeit not necessarily all that satisfied. But the interesting ponderings on certain ideas and themes, the visual aesthetic, the soundtrack, and most of all the characters were enough reason for me to stick with the show until the end. But I still don't entirely know what to make of it and how to feel about it. And I don't know if I'll ever get there. I'm just pretty confused right now. I'm definitely interested to read a couple of analytic essays on it, if there are any, since I wanted to go into this review unbiased. I haven't done that yet. I think ANN is doing one of the ending explain things on it.
One of the pages that I have open very conveniently says something along the lines of, it's a series meant to start conversations.
Yes, and absolutely. And I think you can talk about this show for fucking days, weeks, months, years, if you want to. Because there's so much to unpack in there. There's so much meat to those bones. I think it could also all be pretentious nonsense, but I don't think so. Because I feel like there's enough in there, especially character-wise, that feels substantial. So I'm definitely going to look up some stuff. I rarely do that for shows afterwards, but I'm really interested to do it here because there's just some stuff in there was like, okay, what is the show maybe trying to say here? What's the show maybe trying to do here? I'm not quite clear on that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that because I feel like there's enough in this show that warrants looking at it a little bit closer than on the surface and trying to make more sense of it. And yeah, look into some of the name choices and symbolism and everything because I think there's also enough of that in there. I guess if you will end up liking this show depends on how well you can deal with abstract storytelling and what expectations you have going into this show. If you want to check it out, I think it's being streamed on Amazon Prime in the US and maybe Funimation and Hulu.
I definitely watched it on Funimation.
Okay, so there's that. It's on Wakanim here in Germany and some other European countries. But yeah, if any of this sounded remotely interesting and not too off-putting and daunting or whatever, give it a chance. It's quite an unusual show and definitely not for everyone, I'm sure. But who knows? Maybe once upon a time in your life you have felt like your own castaway version of Robinson Crusoe, lost in the vast sea of your existence, and then maybe, just maybe, this show might be exactly what you've been looking for.
Boy, that was a lot to take in.
Time to get a bit more easygoing.
A little easier to grok.
Mm-hmm.
Just because the next show is a buddy cop vampire adventure, I guess?
Yeah.
Vampires and zombies, that shit's been done to death. But sometimes it hits right. And I kind of feel like the Case Study of Vanitas hit that for me. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, we go from one big studio who, we've talked many times about, Madhouse, to another big studio in Bones who absolutely needs no introduction again.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, this is a story that takes place in sort of a future past alternate history steampunk Paris.
Yes, with giant airships.
Yes.
Look like castles.
And the This world is populated with vampires that walk among humans, but they coexist with them in relative peace. However, when a strange blight strikes that causes vampires to lose control, a young man who has taken the name of an ancient vampire steps in with a magical tome to help out where he can. He is pursued by another vampire who wishes to ascertain the power of the tome for his master. The two get along about as well as oil and water, but they need to come to an agreement in order to accomplish their goals.
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Yes. It's about time we got a story where the vampires aren't out to drink everybody's blood constantly. Or maybe they kind of are.
I mean, they do. And they do it in a very sweaty, hot way.
Let's not bury the lead. The show is very horny.
Yes, this is one of the horniest shows I've seen in a while. And it's not like horny in what, let's say like Dragon Maid. Dragon Maid is also a horny show, but I feel like there's not that many tits thrown around in this, but every time there's blood sucking involved, it's like these characters are fucking on screen.
Oh, like, without a doubt.
Jesus Christ. It's like there is not even a semblance of trying to hide it. It's just like characters are just have red faces and they're moaning and it's just, I don't know, drift away in lust, and it's ridiculous, and it's very funny at times. So
sometimes when the blood hits just right.
Yeah, definitely. I was surprised how fucking horny this show got in that aspect. But it doesn't feel like it's overbearing or unfitting or anything. It's just very, I guess, erotic. And I feel like that is a thing, of course, that is also kind of inherent to the symbolic nature of vampirism and everything. The exchange of body fluids, and you get this kind of thing already with a bunch of other vampire media, right? There's a bunch of eroticism in Interview with a Vampire, I guess, and a bunch of other vampire movies. There's so many. Just inherently a man, sneaking up on a virgin and just forcing himself on her and drinking her blood, which is the sinister version of this. But in this show, it feels like it's mostly used as this. There is consent between the characters interacting in engaging in blood sucking here, at least for some of them, especially for our main characters. And when they're going at it. So yeah, it's really interesting. So yeah, that is definitely a big part of the show. Definitely a lot of horny vampires in this, and non-vampires. So
the story also seems to play a little fast and loose with the traditional rules of vampirism.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they can walk in broad daylight. Cool. Yeah, they can walk in broad daylight, right? They are all day walkers. Or do they say anything about having to wear sunscreen or shit like that? I don't think so.
I don't think they ever did. And the whole blood sucking thing, maybe I've got my lore wrong, but I was under the impression that once you got bit, you yourself would become a vampire. Well,
that depends. Sometimes you just die. Sometimes you also become a vampire. Sometimes it's just like nothing. You just lose blood, and you know, it varies from movie to movie to book. It's always a different definition. Mostly vampires get killed with a wooden stake through the heart, but sometimes the stake is made of silver, sometimes it's a silver bullet like with werewolves, sometimes it's just the garlic, sometimes it's just the sunlight. I feel like a lot of different incarnations of vampire have been thrown around pop culture and media in the past decades. So this is another one that is trying to do some different things with it.
Yeah, I mean we've got another vampire show airing right now.
Right.
With the weakest sauce vampire you ever did see.
Yeah.
But yeah, this to say this show is an absolute visual delight is I don't know if that's an understatement, because this show is incredibly gorgeous.
It's appropriate. It's what it is. It looks really good.
it feels very period appropriate. Mm-hmm. That's weird to say, because it's like I said, there's airships, there's steampunk. It's not quite our timeline, and they kind of touch on that in a later episode in a way that I thought was really interesting. And
Yeah, there's a building not there that should be there, for example.
and that building was one that was proposed but was later rejected for the one that is there in actuality.
Yeah. Really interesting idea. Someone read up on their history when it came to that, and it was like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's a neat idea.
Because that was something I never knew about, and I went and researched it a little bit, and I was like, oh, how about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool shit. And I always like alternate history stuff. I always think that's like, hey, so this is kind of set in our world, but at some point things went a different way. In this case, I guess when, vampires always were around, and then they also, there's like this mineral or something like that, I guess, that relates to them. I forgot what it's called, that serves as an energy source for this world. I forgot what it's called. It's some kind of mineral or element or something like that. And it also powers the airships, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And so that makes sense, where it's like, oh, they discovered that and they used that, so they're a bit more advanced, but also not as advanced at that point in history as, we would be as if they were here today, because, different thoughts and ideas and shit like that. So what would happen if you would introduce advanced tech into an age with a different concept of architecture and morals and whatever, and fashion and shit like that? What would that look like? So that's always interesting. I always like that. I dig alternate history shit, where it's like, hey, what would our world be like if certain things went differently? So I enjoyed that very much about this show.
Yeah, I mean, alternate history can be cool. It can also be kind of, hey, what are you doing?
Oh, yeah.
Sort of tier, because sometimes
can be very problematic.
Sometimes it hits a little wrong.
I wouldn't say that happens in this show, though.
No, it doesn't. I remember there was, I can't remember the name of the game now, but there was this old game, and by old I mean it was like Xbox 360 era. What am I talking about calling it old? Jesus Christ. Where it was, hey, what if World War II, but the Nazis brought the fight to America?
Right.
I can't remember now what it was called, but
I mean, Wolfenstein did that.
Yeah, I guess in a way. Yeah. Maybe more of the newer Wolfensteins than the original.
Yeah, definitely. The second one, New Colossus or what it's called, I think that did that.
Yeah, but in this case where it's more like the like setting itself and these other details, like, yeah, okay, it feels neat, but it doesn't feel like too intrusive.
No,
which
not at all.
Cool.
Yeah, it does some great world building, and it doesn't feel like it's overloading you with fucking exposition and shit. There's enough in there, of course, because sometimes you just have to explain shit, but some of it is just conveyed through the visuals and everything, so that's cool. And there's some interesting ideas in there. It's like, hey, how does the shit actually work? Like, how does the superpowers in this world work? How does the book of Vanitas that the show is about really? How does that work? With there's the story about a philosopher who came up with this theory that the world is made up of formulas, and if you adjust the formula slightly, if you know how to, then you can change things in the world, major things. So that's what all that is about, and that's what the theory Vanitas uses, and with his book, where it's like, hey, if I want to heal these vampires who have gone crazy, I just need to adjust a certain formula in their being, and I can return them and shit like that, or save them, save their soul, return them, and let them find their original name, right. which is a part of the story.
Yeah, this whole, I guess, might as well talk about the characters, or at least start talking about them. So we ostensibly have two main characters. First is Noe Archiviste. Maybe I'm not saying with the right accent, but
it's fine.
He is, shock, a vampire. Oh. And he has been sort of set out by his teacher to seek out this magical tome called the Book of Vanitas, and to sort of ascertain the nature of this book. Not necessarily to like seize and take it, but to just be like, find out about it. We learn about his teacher as the series goes on, but doesn't ever really seem like we find out what his teacher's motive is for finding out what the book is all about. Although, you know, I think there's some suspicion you can draw on it.
Yeah.
And this deals with him running into Vanitas, who's basically the other main character. And is that his real name? Probably not, because he openly claims that he's taken it from this ancient vampire with the same name. So who knows? Maybe Vanitas could just be a title, as far as we know. And he suddenly appears with this book, and he states pretty clearly up front his objective is to help out vampires who have been hit with this curse called malnomen that causes vampires' bodies to become corrupted when they lose their true name, and it magnifies their bloodlust like 100-fold, and it causes them to lose control. Where Noe is kind of, I mean, they're both kind of goofballs, but Noe is always kind of trying to puzzle Vanitas out. And Vanitas is just, he's like, fuck it, I'm do things my way. I don't care what any of y'all think. And that causes problems a lot.
Yes. It's weird. The OP, which is a sexy bop, by the way.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, so great. Makes it look like Noe is the ultimate, goofball, and Vanitas is mainly pissed off by his antics, really. But, they become friends begrudgingly. But they're equal goofballs, like both of them. Vanitas too. Like he gets thrown around a lot and falls on his head a lot, and surprising how much physical abuse he survives. And,
I guess he's just really tough.
Yes, and yeah, absolutely. That might have something to do with the book, but also Noe is like this kind of starry-eyed, not super world-savvy vampire who is just like, oh, interested in a lot of stuff, and I think sweets, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they're kind of different from each other, but they also have a very, I don't know, they have some stuff in common, where it's like they love to act on their own instincts, and sometimes they have very different instincts and then clash with each other. So that's really funny. And yeah, Vanitas is like a very theatrical person who's a very making grand speeches and shit like that, and sometimes needs to get taken down a peg. And Noah is like, I guess, more down to earth, but also sometimes not. And, there's a lot of interesting stuff regarding their backgrounds and everything. And like you mentioned, the stuff with the malnomen and what Vanitas is actually trying to do to save the vampires. Well, he speaks of salvation, but he doesn't mean he will cure all vampires of the curse. If they, if he sees that they are too far gone to save, he will slay them. Yeah. And he proclaims him saving all vampires will be his ultimate act of vengeance against the original Vanitas. And we haven't quite gotten to know yet why he has this mission, really. I think there's some hints in there why he does what he does, but not all of it yet, I think. Later, the show goes more, reveals more about his origin, what happened to him when he was younger, where he came from, and how that relates to the church and everything, who also play a part in the story. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting where they go with these two characters, and Noah trying to do something and seeing some kind of, hope in Vanitas and what he experienced as a youth as well with his grandfather and everything, who... I don't want to say he's the obvious villain of the story, because his voice actor, I forgot his name, is often typecast in bad guy roles, but it's the same for the guy who plays like Lord Ruthven. I feel like, I don't know if the show's just throwing red herrings at us, because, it sure feels like it sometimes, but also... one of them might just be the big bad.
Yeah, I wonder about that. I wonder if they're both big bads. It's
Yeah,
kind of
maybe.
weird. I mean, we get this not so subtle foreshadowing to some of Noe's narration where he's like, so we entered this weird, tumultuous friendship, but little did I know it would end up with me having to kill Vanitas. And at first it was kind of like, but then you get to the end of this season and you sort of start to see why that might be and who might be involved in that.
Yes, it's really interesting. But also, again, could be a red herring. Could be like, hey, will he really slay the Vanitas that we know, or will he slay a version of Vanitas, right? Because just, like our Vanitas took on the name, maybe, that old vampire might get incarnated in some other form, and he might have to slay that. Who knows? It might all just be, just trying to throw us off or anything. But, there are some hints in either direction. So it's really interesting where the story is trying to go there. And, plot-wise, there's a lot to latch onto. There's a lot of, like I said, a lot of world building, a lot of lore. There's a lot of machinations, a lot of political machinations in the background, as well on the vampire side of things as on the human side of things. And it's super fun and engaging. And it's a looker. The show is definitely fucking great to look at. The fight scenes are great. And just fucking insano. And
Yuki Kajiura on the music.
Yes, holy shit, the soundtrack is fantastic. So yeah, the production-wise and plot-wise, the show is great. And also, there's so many characters to like in this show.
There's a lot of characters, period. But you know what, though? It doesn't really feel like overbearing.
No. Some of them are obviously more important than others, and some have only a few bit roles. But even those bit characters have like fun parts, and you're glad that they're in there. Like, Dante, the guy, the go-to guy, the investigator, side detective guy to Vanitas, who have like this kind of, I don't know, semi-professional work
back and forth.
Yeah, and I mentioned the sneak peek. There's a scene that made me laugh out loud where Vanitas is trying to come off of like, hey, we solved this riddle ourselves, and then Dante's like, oh, you don't want this bit of information I have here, right? And then Vanitas just throws himself into the dust before Dante is like, oh, Lord Dante, how I love thee. And this is fucking great. And there are a bunch of other scenes like that in this show. This show is really funny. Like, there are really, really funny bits in there. I mean, again, it all depends on what your kind of humor is, your sense of humor is. But I found enough scenes where I at least had to snicker because of the antics of Vanitas and Noe, because they're fun characters, especially when they're together and are bickering like an old married couple.
One of my favorite things about this show is the facial expressions, because sometimes there was one in particular, this shit-eating grin that Vanitas has on his face. I was just like, that's good. It's really good. It's really good.
It's really good. Vanitas has probably the best faces in this show. I guess Noe too, and Jan to an extent. And these all relate to each other because these faces happen when they are interacting with each other. And yeah, I enjoyed that. It's a great dynamic between all of the characters. There's some great side characters. Another characters, I mentioned Jan already, which is kind of a maybe love interest for Vanitas, I guess.
I feel like they can't figure each other out, but they also can, because
there's this goofy episode where they go on a date because Jan wants to get Vanitas off her back because he's kind of interested in her because she seems to be so easily flummoxed, I guess. And he can throw her off her game so easily, even though she's like the super powerful vampire. So he makes it kind of his play to mess with her a bit, to push her buttons. Yeah. And she's annoyed by that, of course, but she also has maybe kind of feelings for him, is attracted by him. She definitely is attracted by his blood for a very specific reason. They actually give it a scientific explanation for that, which is super funny to me, that they put the effort into that to explain why that is the way. It's basically, for the bitten one, it's like an aphrodisiac pumped directly into the veins, and for the biter, it's the taste of the blood, obviously. It's a very interesting dynamic that also explains why the show is so fucking horny, because you basically I don't know, being fucked with sex hormones all the time, pumped full with that. So Yeah, and that happens, and then they go on a date because she's heard from another character, Dominique, I think, that Vanitas loses interest in a person as soon as they say that they love him or that they care for him, really interested in him. Then they lose all interest to him. So Jan tries to play it off as like as she is really has fallen in love with him and tries to get him to give up. And it seems like in the beginning it works when she says to him, "I love you," but Vanitas, he's no fool, and he figures her out pretty quickly. And it's just like this battle of wits in this in this episode on this date, and it's really funny. And then shit goes really awry by the end, of course, as things do.
Poor Jean is fighting a losing battle the whole time.
Yeah, but it's there are also some episodes like that in this show. It's not all plot related and everything. There are some really fun one-off episodes that I really enjoyed, and that was one of them. Another character I really enjoyed is Roland.
Roland is great.
Roland is fantastic.
Roland is more or less a Knights Templar who is a vampire slayer for the church. And when Noe and Vanitas sneak into a cathedral to try and find out some secrets about this one guy, Dr. Moreau, Roland confronts them, and he basically at first doesn't hold back, but he comes across as this real fucking goof. So they are sneaking into these catacombs, and Noe and Vanitas basically steal the outfits of these guards, and they are clearly lost. And Roland is like, "Hey, it's okay, I'm lost too." And he starts spouting off. He starts spouting off about, "Oh, the Lord is at hand in all things," and Vanitas is like, "Hold it," the whole time.
Yeah, it's really funny because usually Vanitas is the one who pushes buttons, like we mentioned. He loves doing that with Jan. He also really pushes Lord Ruthven's buttons, who's one of the other side characters and maybe antagonists, when he proposes a certain theory about the curse bearers. And that's really intense scene, but also really cool. And but Roland, it doesn't work on Roland. Like, not at fucking all.
Because Roland, he
just twists all of Vanitas' provocations to suit his needs. Like, he turns them around and says, like, he grinds Vanitas' gears even more than Noah does, and it's hilarious. He has an awesome weapon, too. I love Roland. He's fantastic.
It's weird because he's clearly a goof, but he can also play it up for his own needs.
Yes.
Because he's like, "Hey, why don't you look at that thing over there? Isn't that cool?" And Vanitas gets yeeted into a fucking prison cell.
Yeah, it's great. And in the beginning, it's like, oh, okay. Turns out maybe he might be an antagonist and everything because he's with the church. He's staunchly against vampires because he lives by a certain doctrine, or you might think. But Noe is kind of a first for him because he's never met a vampire like Noe, and it completely makes him change his attitude. Like, he rejoices at a human and a vampire laughing together, which Vanitas and Noe do at a certain point. He's like, "What the fuck? This is possible? I never knew," and this completely changes my worldview. And when then another person tries to, threaten our characters, I guess he completely backs them and is like, completely, "You stay out of this bullshit. These are my new friends and fuck you." And it gets really intimidating at a certain point. And it's really cool. And I loved Roland. I think he was one of the best characters in the show. He's not in it that much. He's in the final stretch of episodes. But I hope we see a lot more of him if there are more seasons coming. I don't know if any have been announced yet, but I really looking forward to more Roland.
Yeah, I mean, there is a second season starting in a couple months, so hopefully we'll see more of our boy Roland.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. And we're definitely going to see more of our boy with the subject number 69. Of course, that was his subject.
As soon as they said that, I was like, of course.
Yes, it's had to be. In this show, especially. In this fucking horny show. Oh my god, I love that. But yeah, it's there again. We can't really go, or since this is the first season review, we don't really want to go too much into the plot. Like I said, there's enough going on here, enough with the history of Vanitas the vampire, the what is called the Blue Moon Clan, right?
Yeah.
There's the Red Moon Clan and the Blue Moon Clan, I guess. And Red Moons are the normal vampires, and Blue Moon is, just Vanitas, I think, who has created that curse for the vampires, or that's what it says, but maybe that is not actually the case, and someone else, created the curse and the malnomans and everything. We get this group. I don't know if you've mentioned them yet, John. Charlatan.
Yes, as far as we know so far, the charlatans, or charlatan is the one that may be spreading the curse?
Yes, it seems like it. But we don't know exactly who charlatan is yet. It seems to be a group of people, or of vampires, or whatever they are, who seem to be spreading this. And with one weird smoky figure in the center of it, who seems to be the puppet master. But we don't know who that person is yet. It might just be a charade and might be one of the characters who we know already. So it's really interesting. And I wonder where the show will go with that. And of course, all the background with Vanitas, we see some really grueling shit in Noah's backstory. Damn. This show is pretty bloody at certain points, as you would expect from a vampire show, but it gets really gory, and I did not expect that. Was taken aback a bit by that. Not negative, not in a negative way, really. I was just surprised. I was like, oh, okay, I did not expect this show gets so violent and gruesome, but it got there. And it was a nice contrast to the funny antics that we get in a lot of the other episodes. So, yeah, there are stakes in the show. Ha, 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 ha. Actually, these are the only stakes. I don't think we have seen any actual, typical wooden vampire stakes in this yet.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, so we'll see if that happens. But yeah, I love this show. I thought it was great. I love buddy cop shit. And this does that really well with a very healthy dose of humor, but also interesting plot, story, fantastic characters. And yeah, it's really horny.
Yeah, really horny.
So I think it's great. I don't know, John, what else we can say about the show. If you have some more to say about the characters or something, it's just I would recommend watching this to anyone who is into remotely, anything anime related, because there's enough of everything in here to attract all kinds of viewers. There's action in here, there is a bit of romance in here, there is horror in here in a way, there's fantasy, there's cool science fiction stuff, there's neat character development, neat characters in general, there's great comedy, and outstanding visuals and on soundtrack, just production values in general. So I don't know why you wouldn't like this show, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it is weird to say that it has a little something for everyone, and it makes it work.
Yes, exactly. It's sometimes, a jack of all trades show makes it feel like too many things thrown into this cooking pot, and none of them work really well or feel like they get to the level that they could have grown to if the show was a bit more focused on a certain thing. But I feel like the show easily takes all the different influences and tools and things that it works with and just puts them together. It's like, here's your delicious cake, eat it. And I did, and I loved it. And so, yeah, I don't have any negative thing to say about this show. There's one scene, I guess, that where Vanitas forces a kiss on John that is a bit rapey, but that's the only thing where it was like, did that need to be in here? But aside from that, especially considering how horny the show is, it feels pretty vanilla in that regard, and and not problematic. So I was glad that was the only thing where it's like, okay, he's that kind of guy, I guess, and it fits with vampires.
He kind of gets called on it by Jean is kind of in the service of this boy Luca, and there's story with him as well. It's pretty interesting.
He's in the middle of it, really, because he's part of the royal family, I guess.
Yeah, and at one point Luca gets really heated because he's like, listen, dude, you owe Jean an apology for forcing yourself on her. And he says something to the effect of, there's no need to apologize. After all, Jean and I are both in love with each other. And Jean just very curtly says back to him, keep your fantasies to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Great banter in this show. Great banter.
So good. God, there's that. I think one of my favorite moments, though, is Dominique's introduction.
Yes.
She walks into the room with this storm of petals behind her, and she's wheeling along this, what she calls her attendant, that's spraying the petals around her. It's like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. This is fantastic. Mm-hmm. The petals aren't there just because, oh, it's art. No, they're there because she brought them. They're with her. She's got this. She's covering her own entrance.
Dominique is, in general, is a great character. Also an ass kicker in a way, and she's the childhood French / kind of sister of Noé, I guess. But also maybe love interest, I'm not sure. That sounds more icky than it's supposed to, but they are not related by blood, really. It's just like, I think their grandfather took Noé in when they were kids. I think that's how it worked, right? So kind of his adopted sister in a way. And Noé and her real brother hung out as kids and were like siblings, basically. And then bad shit happened, a lot of bad shit, and yeah, but you know, she still sticks around and she looks out for Noé and everything, so they got this kind of relationship, and yeah, she's super cool. And there's so many super cool characters in this, like, goddamn, like almost every episode, not every episode, but every second or third episode throws a cool new character at you, and if they don't stick around, they still make an impression. And right. Dominic definitely made one. John made one. Roland definitely made one. So, yeah, I can't wait to see these characters again and have a good old fun time. Yeah, and of course, learn how the story continues. It's just there's so many cool different factions in this with cool fucking power sets. And again, the show looks fantastic when these characters clash with each other, when they have their big old fucking fighting games and shit. It's really cool. So again, I don't know how you would go out of this show. I guess if you're really not into vampires, this show is not for you. If you're like, this is such a trite subject and I've seen it so many times and fuck this, I hate vampires, and it's like, okay, I guess. I can see that, but yeah, again, the show does enough things differently with its version of vampires and vampirism that I don't feel like it was a lot of been there, done that feeling for me. Was it for you, John?
No, I mean, in general, yes. That's why I was sort of about this at first, but then, you know, when we got to know the characters and the world and the overarching plot, I was like, yeah, this is a story I feel like I could really get into, because zombies, vampires, that shit's played out. You gotta do something a little different every once in a while. And I'm glad that this story seems to be doing that.
Yeah, we had a lot of vampire anime in recent seasons. Like there was Mars Red, which I haven't which I haven't seen. There's this one. There's one this season. Aside from the Vampire Dies in No Time, I think this is the year of vampires, I guess, for some reason. And I would say, I mean, like I said, I haven't checked out the other shows. I have heard good things about Mars Red. But that seemed a bit too serious to me, or too dark, too horror. I was in the mood for a straightforward horror show, I guess. And this Vanitas seemed much more accessible because it's also like we said, this buddy cop show with a lot of comedy thrown in there, some very shonen-y parts, you know, with the battles and everything. And some cool world building with the alternate history stuff and everything, and definitely cool visuals, and it's a Bones show. So, of course, I'm going to gravitate to that over others. I don't know which studios did the other shows, but still, it's like, of course, I'm going to check out this one. If I have to check out a vampire show this year, it's going to be this one. And definitely did not regret it. I don't know. This is based on a manga, right?
Yes.
How?
We
Yeah.
didn't touch on that actually.
Yeah.
The original manga was written by one Jun Mochizuki, and it's apparently been running since 2015, and it's still running. So
Oh, okay. Well, that's okay. I was hoping it was already finished. I hope this is not just promotion anime for the manga, which sometimes happens, where it's like, hey, the manga maybe needs a bit more, needs a sale push, so we're gonna make it an anime for it.
I
So
mean,
I hope
it's
that doesn't happen.
it's only it's been running for that long, but there's like 54 chapters. It looks like,
What? Only? That
uh,
seems way too few.
unless they're real chunky boy chapters.
Chapters or volumes?
Chapters.
Okay, weird.
There's
Okay.
9 volumes of the manga released,
Hmm.
so
Do you know how much of the material the first season covers? Yeah.
okay, we have an answer. It looks like we got to, and this is gonna sound like it's not much, chapter 11, because a lot of these there's a lot of these different volumes are hundreds of pages. So
Weird. So they're not
there's a
the.
lot.
So that's not your usual tankobon size, I guess.
No, the
Interesting.
like for instance, the first volume is 4 chapters and it's 234 pages worth.
Weird. What the fuck? Usually, how many pages do chapters usually have? Oh
I
god.
God, I don't think like nearly even half that many. Like, 'cause
No,
this
no.
is averaging out to like maybe anywhere between 45 to 60 pages per chapter.
Yeah. That seems like a lot. Weird. Interesting. That's good. So we got a lot of material to go on to. I mean, if it's only 11 and we have 54, that means we maybe get another 3 to 4 seasons out of this, I guess. Maybe.
Well, if the interest is there to keep it going.
Yeah, let's hope so. If on my side it is. I don't know about you, but
Oh, without a doubt, but
yeah. Yeah, we don't represent the anime community as a whole, I guess. But
right.
yeah, I would love to see more Case Study of Vanitas. I enjoyed this show a lot. I thought it does enough different things with the vampire stuff that it doesn't feel too much of a retread of the material, and the lore and the mystery and the myth and everything. And all the characters are great. The story, the plot is great, enticing, and there's enough of a mystery in there that you want to keep going. You want to keep see the rest. So yeah, absolutely. I would like more. John, seems to be the case for you as well.
100%. I want to see more of these goofballs, and I want to see more of this mystery get unraveled.
Yes, absolutely. Where can people watch it?
Uh, in the Americas, you can watch it on Funimation and Hulu. Looks like Wakanim in most of Europe, and then it's on about a whole bunch of different other places in like the Asian and the SEA area.
So go check this one out. This is Sonny Boy. I could only recommend for a certain set of people. Vanitas, I think most people should like. I can't, like I said, unless you don't like vampires at all, I don't feel like there's anything in there that would make you not enjoy the show. It's a blast. It's a fun romp. It's a fun action comedy with cop elements and everything. And if you're into that, definitely check it out. And if you any of the aspects we mentioned, check it out as well. I think you will not be disappointed. John, what are your final thoughts on the Case Study of Vanitas?
I guess I'm going to have to crack a book open to learn some more.
And that is a wrap on the 121st episode of Anime Brain Freeze. All the music in our show is from the Double Dragon Neon soundtrack by the amazing Jake Kaufman. Please go to virt.bandcamp.com and check out his awesome work. Our show is available on most of the popular podcast services, but it's always worth visiting animebrainfreeze.com for our review index and more. Leave us comments and questions on YouTube, follow us on Twitter at AnyBrainFreeze, or send an email to animebrainfreeze@gmail.com. We would love to read your feedback. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you had a good time, and please join us again on our next episode. Mach's gut.
Take care, everybody. Next time on Anime Brain Freeze.
Gangs of Tokyo.
and then a United States of smashing right into the floor.